Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 181. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Colorado, we have a very, very, very special guest, Dan Mosko. Dan, how are you?
Doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me here.
Of course, it's an honor to have you on the podcast, and I think it'll become apparent as the conversation unfolds why we got connected, but I want to start with who connected us. One of the best human beings that I've ever come across, Chris Gabayan, who is also episode 126 of this podcast, connected us and recommended that we have this conversation. And I'm grateful for Chris because anybody who comes through him is automatically a good friend of mine. And I'm excited to solidify that through this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. Chris is a great dude. Can't say enough good things about him, frankly.
Yeah. So with that being said, Dan, this is going to be about you. And so why don't we start with this? If people listening have never heard your name, they don't know who you are, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good question. I'd say that I'm a big brother. I'm a former collegiate athlete, avid outdoorsman, and most recently founder of Elevation Everest, which is a elevation-based endurance race.
Awesome. I think you might be the first person to introduce yourself as a big brother. That is something that you and I share. I'm also a big brother. Tell me about your sibling or siblings.
Yeah, great. I've got two little brothers. They're both living out in the Seattle area with the rest of my family. The middle one is a physical therapist and is, really passionate about helping people feel the best version of themselves possible. The youngest one's still figuring out what his direction in life is going to be, but I think that's a beautiful thing. And the younger folks that have had to figure that out during COVID have all of the respect in the world for me because that's a tough thing to do.
Yes, very tough. And so with it being said, people listening to this might be the oldest child like you and I. They might have older siblings, something that I can't relate to. What's the best part about being the oldest and what's the hardest part about being the oldest?
That's a good question. Best part about being the oldest, I think it's the responsibility, honestly. It's the fact that that there's other people that just by definition will probably be looking up to you to set the example. But it also means that you have this opportunity to drive an impact for them, right? To help them figure out their problems, help them figure out what they want out of their life, and help them navigate, whatever that's going to look like for them. The hardest part, frankly, it was growing up and having to be the first person to ask for certain things in my family. Like I always wanted a pet snake, and my mom was like, absolutely not. And by the time my youngest brother made his ask to her, I think she was too tired to say no. So he got a lot more leniency as far as like the family rules in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had my grandfather on the podcast and he always called me number one growing up. And I was the first grandchild on either side of my family. And he always talked about the responsibility of setting an example and kind of blazing a path. And I didn't really understand what that meant until I got older and saw the trail that was behind me and the actions that my brother, my sister, cousins were or were not taking, possibly because of what I did. And that can be heavy at times. And I'm curious if you feel that responsibility extend out beyond just your siblings to the other people in your life, other family, friends, or just coworkers, acquaintances, etc.
100%. 100%. I think it's a core part of my personality at this point, right? If you feel responsibility for family members, you kind of naturally carry that over in other facets of life. So 100% with my close friends, I'm constantly, making sure everybody's feeling good, checking in on them, and putting a lot of personal like energy into that space. And then I have a corporate job, which I hope we don't talk too much about today, but I do lead a team in that sense, and there's a personal component to that where I think if good leaders have really good empathy, they understand what their people are going through, and they see their employees as like as people more than just like the job function they serve, and I feel like I really embody that in the way that I lead my team.
So I think that sometimes it's hard to see beneath the surface when people have, seem to have it all together, right? They have
Mhm.
the job, they have the drive, they have the fitness, the health, etc. And on the surface, that's how it appears. I think those people sometimes really struggle beneath the surface, behind the scenes. I'm wondering for you, is it hard to ever ask for help rather than give it to other people?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I don't think there's any shame in asking for help. Some of the leaders that I look up to most have talked about how they've benefited so much just by working with therapists or life coaches or business coaches. And you can feel confident in your ability. You can feel like good about your direction and good about your plan. But at the end of the day, there's no shame at all in asking for help. I think to your specific question, I think my biggest issue is I feel like I can always figure it out and I don't necessarily need it. But if I get to a point where I feel like I need it, I'm certainly not shy about asking for it.
Yeah, that ability and belief that you can figure things out, where does that come from for you?
Proof points, right? I think that everybody's life is it's an accumulation of life experience where maybe you choose to do things that are difficult, maybe you choose to do things that are easy, but the amalgamation of all of those experiences helps you kind of understand, okay, what can I actually do? And the interesting thing that I've realized is that the more that you put on your plate, the more that you're actually capable of accomplishing. There are certainly limits. There's certainly risk of burnout, and I've experienced I've experienced that personally before. Um, but at the end of the day, like if you have those proof points from your past, whether those be from professional endeavors or doing races that are just way out of your comfort zone, and you accomplish those things even though they were hard, next time you come across a hard thing, it's like, oh, okay, this can't possibly be as hard as that last thing I did. And if it is, then the next time you see a hard thing, you've already got that experience knowing that, okay, I've already done something like that in the past.
Yeah, it brings to mind one of my favorite quotes from Alexis Carrel, who said, "To progress again, man must remake himself, and he cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor. In order to uncover his true visage, he must shatter his own substance with heavy blows of his hammer." And I love that image of this block of marble, and you are the marble, and you are also the sculptor, and you get to chisel yourself into the person who you want to become. But that chiseling is painful, it's hard, it's uncomfortable. And I don't know if you've ever thought about things like this, but in recent weeks, I've been reflecting and I love the idea of pushing limits. I think my fault is that I often push too far for too long at the expense of other things and people in my own life. And I've come to realize that about myself. But there's this fear in me, and I don't know, I haven't pinpointed it just yet, but this fear that if I don't push up against the limits, that those outer limits will continue to shrink in toward me. And if I'm not expanding, then I'm shrinking. And I don't know
Mhm.
if that's a unique thought to me or if you've ever had thoughts similar, but I'd be curious to hear your take on that.
I certainly have, right? And I think that really strong type A personalities probably feel the same way, where it's like, okay, I want to become the best version of myself possible. I want to accomplish all of these different things, these big audacious goals. And I think that those are healthy thoughts and perspectives to have. I do think it's important to balance that with like reflection and acknowledgement of what you've been able to accomplish with that effort. Because I think if you're just constantly sprinting towards a far away goal without, stopping to smell the flowers, for lack of a better term, you can certainly burn out. And I think the way that I try and focus on that personally is thinking about like core life pillars, right? Between, family and friends, personal relationships with significant others, health and wellness, and then beyond that, like broader community. And then I guess you could also look at it from like a professional standpoint too, where if I ever feel like I'm out of balance or things aren't going the way that I want them to, if I step back and I look at some of those core pillars, usually one of those things is out of whack. Maybe I haven't called my grandmother in a couple of weeks, or maybe I haven't talked to my best friend in a day or two longer than I've wanted to. And it's usually a pretty easy fix, but I think that reflection is really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'll share a quick thought slash story before I ask you the first big question of our conversation. I was watching this interview, and I don't remember who the interviewer or the interviewee was. So that's not helpful if anybody wants to go find this, but I'll do my best to relay the message. And this person was talking about how they went on this trip to some foreign country and they climbed this beautiful mountain. And they climbed the mountain with a guide, and they needed to climb starting at midnight so that they could get to the top for sunrise. And as they're standing on top of this mountain, watching this beautiful sunrise, this person recognizes or notices that there are other mountains off in the distance. And he starts asking his guide, hey, if I wanted to climb that one, could I book it through you? Or, like, how do we do that? How do we get there? And the guide, who was local to the area, just put his hand on this guy's shoulder and said, hey, why don't you appreciate the mountain that you're standing on? And I think I do that all the time. I don't think that's unique to me either. I think a lot of people do that, where you've climbed this mountain, you've accomplished these things, you've done these things that maybe at one point you said would make you happy or that would leave you feeling fulfilled. And as soon as you get there, you can now see all these other things. And you think, I want to do that thing. I should do that thing. I need to do this other thing. And it leaves us with this lack of appreciation for the moment, for what we've already done, for where we are. And I think it's a really important reminder. And so if you have any thoughts there, I'd love to hear them. And if not, I can hit you with the first big question.
For sure. I empathize with the concept for sure. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly at surface level distracted by these other things that I'd like to go do. For example, like this idea of potentially chasing down like the Leadville 100, run. Like that sounds amazing, but then it's like, okay, what does that mean for my day to day and the other goals and things that I've already committed to? So I think that balance is important. The perspective is important, and I think if you can, I'm a big fan of like vision boards and kind of outlining, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? And using that as my North Star for how I make decisions that might distract me from potentially getting to that end state. So I empathize with the concept, and I think it's important to constantly make sure you're on the path that you want to be on. And if something detracts from that, maybe make a tough decision to set that aside for a little bit.
Mm. With that being said, when you look back at your own life up until this point, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself, Dan?
It's a really good question. I've been thinking hard about this one, knowing that this was coming. So last year when we started building Elevation Everest, I mean, 2024 was a year of Murphy's Law for me. We started building this race in October, and into, I want to say, February, March, right as we're like starting to get the website up and going, starting to drive advertisements. Um, First, we had a sewer line break in the house. I remember sitting in my backyard in a lawn chair and hearing water under the house, and just, you grab your face and you're just like, man, that doesn't sound good. That's going to be expensive. So first that issue happened. We got that handled, and then about 3 weeks later, I started noticing cracks coming out of, the windowsills and the door frames in the house, and I'm thinking, okay, that's not good either. That might be a foundation problem. So we had a structural engineer come out and take a look at the house, and sure enough, the main support running under the middle of the house from all the water from the sewer was not straight. It was leaning over. Um, so they looked at that, and then while they were doing that inspection, they also noticed that the rafters in the roof had broken from some of the heavy snowfall we had had the prior season. Um, I'm not a rich man, just for context, right? Like we work for everything we have. So that was a, a 1-2 punch, just, really, really tough. And then I'll layer a little bit more onto that. Our family cat started showing signs of not doing particularly well. She wasn't eating, so I took her into the vet, and they said, your cat's actually got cancer, and we think she's got about a month and a half to live. Um, Fortunately, that ended up not being the case, but it was still about a $4,000 surgery to confirm that. And all the while, right, you're dealing with these financial burdens that, when you're in the moment and you're looking at them, you're like, how am I going to figure this out, right? Where is this money going to come from to keep my home standing? And then all the while, I'm also working a full-time job and trying to build Elevation Everest from nothing. Uh, Also under a very tight timeline, right? We started selling tickets in March, and the race was in September, which also required a pretty significant personal investment. So all of that, right? It just kind of felt like the world was coming down on me from every single direction, and there's not really an out, right? You have like basically one of two decisions. You can either say, I can't handle it, and I'm going to have to get some of these things off my plate by maybe bowing out of building the race and refunding the tickets that we had sold and canceling our contract with Winter Park. Um, on the money side of things, okay, maybe I take loans, maybe I go bankrupt, like whatever it is, right? Or you can say, okay, each of these is their own individual problem. And well, somewhat fortunately for me on the money side, it was sequential. It wasn't like all immediately at the same time. So you look at the resources you have and you kind of figure out a plan, and then you execute that plan. And then you have to rely on your support system through things like that too. My team was really integral in my support in terms of being able to continue making progress on the race, as well as my family. I was constantly on the phone with my dad and my mom, just like, oh man, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And they were just helping me kind of brainstorm through the options and figure out my plan. And I think when you're able to figure out, okay, these are the next 2, 3, 4, 5 steps that I need to take, and then you take that first step and you go, okay, now I'm on step two, then step three, and eventually I'm going to run out of steps, and this issue is going to be addressed. Knowing that that is what your future holds for you is comforting in a way, especially when it feels like you're like that meme of that dog sitting in a burning kitchen saying, "This is fine, this is fine." So
Man, hearing you talk about all of that, one thing after the next, it can almost feel overwhelming to somebody listening to it. I can't imagine how overwhelming it felt to you to be in it. What were some of the thoughts or the feelings that you were experiencing while all of this was happening? And I want to preface, or I guess whatever comes after the question, the opposite of preface, that question with, you are so composed talking about it right now. Were you that composed when all of this was happening in the moment? And if not, what was going on inside of your mind?
yeah. So the way that I felt about it in the moment was like the first issue was a shock. Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me. And there's a moment of, man, I'm the victim here. I can't believe this is happening to me. But then it's like, listen, everybody goes through different shapes of hardship in their life. And this was mine at that time, right? So you get through that first one, and then the next one comes, and it's like, okay, all right, this one's bigger. But again, I have that proof point. I was able to get through that first one. Let's figure out the second one. And you almost become numb to like that gut reaction of, oh my God, I can't believe again this is happening. And you immediately just start jumping into that solution mindset. All right, how do I fix this? What's the next step? And I would say that like between that and then a really intentional effort to compartmentalize life, where okay, I've got those house problems, that's over here. I've got my business, that's over here. As long as I, can kind of check the box that the things that need to happen in each of those different compartments are done, you can then focus on the next thing. And I talk with my girlfriend about this pretty often about like, okay, with all of these things happening all at once, like how do you sleep? How do you fall asleep with all of these things swirling around in your head? And you take a deep breath and you think about, okay, I'm not going to solve any of these problems tonight as I lay down to go to bed. I'm going to try and put those things to the side and just, take deep breaths, focus on like letting my body relax and going to sleep. Um, so frankly, it's like probably one of my favorite, again, proof points. We keep talking about that as a concept that I can, I feel like I'm pretty capable of handling, whatever kind of hurdles are thrown my way. Um, yeah. And I think there was a second part of your question. I'm not sure if I covered it or not.
No, I think you hit on it. And a couple thoughts come up for me. And one of them is a quote from Mikhail Lermontov, who said, "Many a calm river begins as a turbulent waterfall, yet none hurtles and foams all the way to the sea." And it's that image of a waterfall that could be so powerful, so violent even, and at the base, if you're standing under that, it can feel overwhelming and confusing and even suffocating. But as the water moves away from the source, it gets calm, and that feeling doesn't last forever. And I think the feeling of being overwhelmed is an interesting one, because if you step back and compartmentalize, like you said, and I love that word, I love that concept. I would even love for us to talk more about it. But if you can compartmentalize and step back, that feeling of overwhelm diminishes, because you recognize that, okay, here are the three buckets that I need to focus on. And here is the one right next thing that I need to do in each bucket. And that's all I can control. And maybe for some people, that's enough to say, all right, I'm going to let go of everything else for the time being, because I can't do anything more than what I'm about to do in these buckets. And I just think that's such a powerful concept. Is that something that you felt you were proficient at before all of this happened? Or is compartmentalizing and stepping back and taking small action, chipping away at these things, is that something you learned through this season?
I think it's both. I think the concept of separating different parts of life and focusing on the thing that's, immediately in front of you is something that we've probably all done, whether we really realize it or not. I certainly never have had to do it to that extent. So my ability to handle that many different moving parts all together all at once is something that I certainly learned through last year to a different level than before. But we all have, for example, maybe we're training for a race, and then maybe we have our day job that has its own demands, and then we have family, friends, and other relationships. And you need to dedicate energy and time to supporting each of those things, or they fall out of balance. So yeah, I think it's something to kind of summarize that the extreme experience of something like that will push you to be more proficient in that particular skill set. But I think we all have the ability to do it. We just might not realize that we're doing it consistently throughout our day-to-day lives.
So, to go back to everything you shared, that was not that long ago. Is there
Mhm.
part of this that you are still in the thick of?
Um, it, so I honestly don't think about it too much anymore. I mean, yes, there's like financial obligations that you still have to deal with, but there's a plan in place for all of those things, and it's largely automated, so I don't really think about it from like a day-to-day perspective. The uh, as far as like the house issue, again, it's addressed. The cat is healthy. The business is growing very, very quickly, and the other parts of life are in an amazing spot as well. So, no, I don't really dwell on it much. I'm certainly still dealing with it, but not thinking about it consistently. I think I'd be crippled with anxiety if I was thinking about everything that we had to deal with all the time, like we were talking about.
Yeah. And just to go back to one other thing you mentioned, because I think this is something that a lot of people listening could benefit from.
Mm.
When you had all of this running through your mind and you were in the thick of it, how were you able to go to sleep at night? Because I think that's something that a lot of people are challenged with. Their minds race about worries, concerns, and all the things that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I think it does you have to zoom out from just the moment of trying to go to bed and think about what the day looks like too. I think for me in particular, and I'm sure you probably empathize with this as well, Joe, but exercise and exerting like hard at some point in the day is crucial for me, or I'll be a ball of energy and anxiety. I just like need to get that out of my system. So making sure that I held true to my routine, and I was, I was up at 5. I went to the gym for an hour before I went into my office for work. And I followed that routine consistently where, I wasn't giving my body or my mind a new change to have to deal with. You were sprinkling, difficulties and challenges throughout the day, but it largely looked the same. And because of that, by the time I got to bed, or by the time I was trying to go to bed, it would, all I needed to do was take a deep breath, really focus on my breathing. Um, I'll play a game of Mancala with my girlfriend to kind of get my mind off of whatever might still be lingering there before trying to go to sleep. And I guess I'm fortunate in that I don't struggle too much to fall asleep at night, even when things are busy and difficult.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm the kind of person that if I don't get a chance to exercise and push myself, it becomes more challenging to go to bed. However, in general, when I keep my routine and structure and I work hard, I can hit the pillow and fall asleep no matter what's going on. And I guess that's a blessing.
100%. I might offer one other kind of, we'll call it a micro story here too. I mean, that was like the big picture example of the hard thing that I didn't choose. But there's a story of part of building Elevation Everest last year that I think is too good just not to share with you. Um, we had our packet pickup scheduled for a Saturday. And what that entails is having like the timing chips and the bags and everything prepared for the athletes to come pick those things up. And the day before we're scheduled to have those things, or to distribute those things, I look through all of our mail and I realize, and at this point our garage is filled with sponsor donations and things like that. But I look through the mail and I'm realizing we don't have the packets. They're not here. We've got, several hundred people coming to a sponsor location at Runner's Roost to pick up these things that we just don't have to give them. And so we start, calling people to try and figure out, okay, what actually happened here? And it turns out there was just a delay with the shipping, and that the packet was in Colorado at a FedEx location out towards the airport, which was about an hour drive from my home. And they had talked to us about, hey, listen, we're going to try and get these things to you guys out in the first thing in the morning. Well, packet pickup started at 9:30. So I get up in the morning and I'm thinking, okay, what are we going to do here? Like and you know those facilities, right? There's no way that you're going to get into them, but we had to try. Like it wasn't an option for us to have to call people or like have to email folks and tell them like, hey, we're going to have to cancel this because we just don't have these things to give you. I think customer experience is the most important thing when you're building a more expensive, race experience like this. People need to feel like everything is fully thought out and everybody's prepared and organized. So not having that wasn't an option for us from my perspective. So anyways, I hop in the car, I start calling all my teammates. I'm like, guys, you need to find me an address. Let's go figure out where these things actually are. And I'll try and go, convince somebody to let me in this facility to find our packet in this sorting center. So long story short, I make it out there. I talk to the security guard for about 25 minutes to try and convince her that no, I'm not a security threat, but like my business really depends on you guys letting me take this little box that you have in that big facility back there. And I think they were able to empathize with me a bit. And I think my favorite moment in specifically building Elevation Everest last year was seeing this really big grin on this
Mm.
delivery man as he's holding 2 boxes, walking out of the facility and saying he's got them for us.
Wow.
We literally made it back into town with 10 minutes before packet pickup started.
That is a great story. And something you said sticks out to me. Not trying was not an option. And right, like in that scenario, it could have been easy to throw up your hands and say, well, I guess the packets may or may not get here tomorrow and it's in FedEx's hands. But instead, you chose to do the hard thing and to take it into your own hands. And it worked out. And that's a beautiful thing. And while we're on the topic, Dan, I would love to hear more about the backstory behind Elevation Everest and, what spurred you on to create something like this.
100%. So Back in 2022, I completed an Ironman, and that was the first big time endurance event that I had participated in. And I had this amazing experience of getting to cross the finish line with my family and a couple of friends out there, who were cheering me on and screaming my name. And the guy goes, "Daniel Mosko, you are an Ironman," and that feeling is incredible. So if anyone's thinking about doing an Ironman, I wholeheartedly endorse it. I think it's one of the best experiences you'll ever have. Um, but that feeling, I think, is something that more people should have. And there are plenty of endurance events all over the world that you can choose to engage in. And I think all of them are amazing in their own way. But we wanted to create something that was a little bit different, right? I think when you think of endurance racing now, it's okay, how far are you going to go? How many miles? How many hours? And for us, it was, well, why don't we define it in the context of elevation gain? We live in Colorado. We have beautiful mountains around us. Why not like use that? And there's other Everesting events out there that have been gaining in popularity, but none of them are really races. They're all challenges. So we wanted to be able to offer a challenge and a race all together in one, and use, the biggest measuring stick on the planet in the context of elevation gain, the largest mountain, right? Elevation Everest or Mount Everest. Um, that, and then we also wanted to make it accessible, right? So maybe somebody's not going to be able to go and climb 15,000 vertical feet in a day, or 29,000 vertical feet in a day if you're going to do a full Everest or a half Everest. So why don't we make this a community event? Let's bring people together to give them that experience of crossing a finish line together in a format that's unique and different and fun. So we offered, a relay component to the race as well. So I think if we boil it all down, it's trying to give more people that experience of crossing a finish line in front of family and friends, and then promoting health, wellness, and community through something that brings people together to do something that's challenging and that's hard.
That's beautiful. I don't know if the next question will elicit an answer that brings us further down this path, but I'll ask it. We'll see where it takes us, and we could always circle back. But when you look back at your life to this point, Dan, what is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why did you do that thing?
Sure. I'll talk about my Ironman experience, for this one. Up to this point, I had never done any type of endurance racing beyond like a sprint distance triathlon. And I had a boss back from my first job who was an Ironman. And I thought that, oh man, that's so cool. That's like a part of his personal brand. And, you know, he's a badass. That guy's the man. I'm like, oh, I kind of want to be like him. I want to try something like that. So after a couple of years of living in Colorado, and then my roommate Dave having done Ironman Lake Placid, I go, like let's do this. Let's sign up for it. And at that point, certainly couldn't swim more than maybe a couple hundred meters. I hadn't run more than more than a 10K at that point. And I enjoyed mountain biking, but I hadn't done any type of long distance road riding either. And so those things for me it was a big, scary, difficult challenge, for my level of athleticism at that time. And the reason I wanted that was like I specifically remember wanting to find that particular point in the race that I would want to quit.
Mm.
I would want to be like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And then show myself, okay, nah, just keep going. You can definitely keep taking those steps. You can keep moving forward. Um, and that point certainly came. I remember very acutely, right, that during my bike ride, at mile 96, both my quads and my hamstrings cramped. And it was right at the base of this big hill, and I had to just take as much salt in as I could to try and get those things to release. And then, you finish your bike ride, and then by the time I got to the marathon, my stomach had flipped from all the salt, so I couldn't eat. Um, and I think it was around I was just finishing the half marathon point, and I was like, I literally can't run anymore. Like I cannot move. I'm so tired. I'm so hungry. I have like nothing left in me. And you kind of hobble your way through the next half marathon. And it I almost I'm almost like a little disappointed that I didn't actually get to the point where I wanted to quit because of how hard I pushed myself in my training. I knew that, you can just keep going. You can just keep taking steps. Maybe it's a little slower than you want, but you're going to get that race finished.
I have a serious question for you. Do you feel like there is a point out there where quitting would become an option in your mind outside of significant injury or risk of safety?
Is this question specific to the Ironman or specific to a race or specific to maybe it's open to like business in pursuit of another goal?
That's a great question. Let's do two parts here. First would be physical pursuits, and then second would be everything else in life, business, relationships, etc.
Sure. So barring physical harm, right? And that can be like significant injury, but it can also be something that might not be as acute, right? You might not realize it, but you hear about people having, you know, people talked about like internal bleeding issues or brain issues during long form endurance events. So knowing that that's a possibility, like long-term harm is never worth pursuit of a, sorry, pursuing a short-term goal is never worth long-term harm in my perspective. Life is
Yep.
too valuable. It's too,
Yep.
it's too important. Um, knowing if we hold for that, right? If we control for that and we say, all right, well, we know that you're not going to harm yourself in that way, then the answer is no, right? If you want to, if you set your goal and you build your plan and your goal is to do something, and maybe it's hard, maybe you want to quit at points, but like there's no reason for you to specifically quit besides just being tired and not wanting to do it anymore. Like, good. That's the whole point of why you signed up for whatever challenge you're doing.
I agree. And the reason I asked that question is because hearing you talk about the Ironman experience, it almost sounded like no matter what had happened, you would have a way to reframe and put things into perspective and continue to put one foot in front of the other. And so, where I'm more interested is the life side of things because there
Mm.
are so many more variables and so many more considerations. But is there a point where you would get to something, whether you're building it, creating it, pursuing it in life, where you would say, you know what? I don't like the concept of quitting, but I think it makes sense to stop this thing and not pursue it.
Yeah, we started today's conversation talking about being a big brother or and how that extends into, other relationships or dynamics that you might have with other people. And I don't know that pursuing a professional goal is ever going to be worth sacrificing in one form or another a relationship that you really care about. Now, of course, there's going to be, as you pursue big, challenging things in life, your perception of certain relationships will change. What becomes important to you will change. Your values might evolve, right? And I think that's healthy and it's good, right? You might realize, well, this person that I used to be close with, they don't really share my perspective of what's important in life. And because of this other experience that I've had building something,
Mm.
that's not somebody I necessarily want to associate with as much anymore. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think everybody should continuously kind of audit their social circles and, make sure that the people around them make them better. Um, but when you are confident that the people in your circle are they're they have your best interest in mind and that they push you to be the best version of yourself and your relentless pursuit of a goal jeopardizes jeopardizes the quality or like the basis for those relationships, then it might be time to reevaluate. Or maybe it's time to like shift the goal, right? I won't say that it's like ever time to quit because I don't really believe in quitting because of really anything, right? Um, but I think you do need to make adjustments to make sure that those other core pillars are still stable.
That's a great answer. And I think very easy to understand from an intellectual perspective, very hard to implement when you're in the thick of it at times. And so, with all of that being said, anything else to add to the hardest thing you've ever done on purpose before I ask you the next question?
It's a loaded question because if we move out of that endurance like athletic experience, building elevation Everest hands down is the hardest thing that I've ever done. There's just so many moving parts that go into building a race experience that we're satisfied with delivering to our registrants and to our participants. But it's 100% the most rewarding thing I've ever done too. Like seeing people that never thought they'd be able to accomplish or finish that race, or after talking with, there was a gentleman named Greg who I spoke with probably 10 times. He was asking me for advice on training and I think he's 68 years old. And then seeing him on race day show up and like give me the high five, like, hey man, I made it here. I'm pumped. That is rewarding. But getting to that point was really tough. There's a lot that goes into it, and that's probably worth its own conversation, frankly.
Well, let me ask you this. To date, how many races have happened? Is it just the first?
Just the first one in September of last year. Our second one will be September 27th of this year.
Amazing. And so you can relate to this in a business sense, but also in a life sense. We for Project Endure have put on 3 annual events. So 2022, 2023, 2024, we throw this big event. We invite everyone who is following the brand and the community, one of our coaching clients, etc. And we do hard things together and we build connections and we create memories, and it's really special. And over the last 3 years, and now heading into our 4th annual event that'll happen April 26th, 2025, it's a lot of work. There are a lot of logistics. It's a lot of planning. There's stress involved. It's hard, and I won't sugarcoat it. It's just hard to put that on. And last year, the night before the event, it's me and my wife taking all of the boxes from sponsors, from all the stuff we have, and loading it into a U-Haul that we rented and jamming the doors shut because it barely fits. And you're exhausted. And I remember sitting in the U-Haul, I want to say at 9 p.m., which is past my bedtime to begin with, the night before the event, just stressed because the lights in the U-Haul wouldn't go out. And I couldn't figure it out. Like I was trying to close all the doors and make sure everything was sealed, and we just couldn't figure it out. And I'm just sitting there with my head in my hands and just feeling just run down. And then the next day we get there, we set up, best day ever. And I'm ready to do it all over again. And you forget about all the hard stuff. And
Yeah.
and then we get through the next cycle, and now there's stress and it's hard and whatever. And then I'll get to the event day and it'll be the best day ever and I'll want to do it all over again. And it's so amazing how we can forget some of the things that once maybe would tempt you to quit or make it less enjoyable because the payoff is so worth it. And it sounds like you've experienced that once and you'll experience it again and again and again.
You hit the nail on the head. We literally had the exact same experience, maybe not with the U-Haul, but with things going wrong on the Friday before the Saturday race. And I remember getting back to the hotel room with some of my teammates and just being like, "Oh my gosh, guys, we really need to get to bed." My Whoop data was telling me I had exerted at the highest level I've exerted at in months, and my recovery was at the lowest level it's been at in months. But like there's no other option, right? You figure it out. You figure it out, and you get through it as a team. And I think that's frankly part of the reason why we see the success that we do is that we have a team that supports each other in a way that helps us get to the goals that we've set.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, with that being said, pursuing anything, building anything, it requires an element of endurance. And when you hear the word endurance or endure, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. For me, it's the combination of belief and grit,
Mm,
right? It's belief that you can get through it. It's belief that you can accomplish your goal. It's belief that things are going to be okay. And the grit piece is just showing up, right? Showing up, doing the thing you got to do to make sure that you're progressing towards that thing or getting through that difficult thing. And I think if you have those two things, if you boil all challenges down in life, like you can pretty much get through just about anything.
mm. Let's say someone listening feels like they have neither. They're
Mm.
like, I don't have belief in myself or faith beyond myself, and I don't have any grit because I've just never had any. If they could magically be granted one of those two things, belief or grit, but not both, which one would you say has to come first or could come first to then help spur on the other? And I know
It's a really,
I'm putting you on the
yeah,
spot here. So take a second to think about it.
sure. No, I have an answer for you. The
Yeah.
answer is belief, right? You have to believe that you can get through whatever that thing is in front of you. And you can build grit over time, right? You can give yourself experiences, micro experiences that prove to yourself, got another proof point reference, right? But you can give yourself a micro experience that helps you validate that you can get through difficult things. And maybe it's small, right?
Mm,
Maybe you don't necessarily believe that you can run 5 miles in one go. Okay, well, put your shoes on and run 400 meters. Okay, cool. Then the next day, let me do 500 or 600. And I think you can build grit over time, but you've got to like you have to wholeheartedly believe that maybe you can't do it today, but eventually you will be able to do it, and you need to just commit to that system. And over time, you'll do the thing that you're setting out to do. I think it's something that will surprise people if they try and embody that.
Love that answer. And it makes me think of the word yet. Belief is kind of like, I'm not there yet. It hasn't happened yet. And I think if we can put the word yet at the end of a lot of the negative things we say to ourselves or think about ourselves, it changes the game because you might not be there yet, or you might not have done the thing you said you were going to do yet. I think that belief is really powerful. And like you said, grit can be taught, it can be practiced, it can be trained. And it starts with doing hard things. And those hard things don't have to be big things, they can be very small things. And so I hope that can serve as a good challenge and encouragement to people listening to go out and do something hard and start building that grit and belief, hand in hand, side by side.
100%.
So, as we wind down our conversation, Dan, this last question is meant to be open ended so that you can share whatever it is that is on your mind and your heart with people listening. But I'll preface it by saying that the people listening are eclectic. There are people all over the world going through all different sorts of things. Some of them are facing the kind of hard that they didn't choose. Others are in the middle of a hard that they did choose, and maybe it's even harder than they thought it would be. But regardless, you get to say whatever it is you would like to the people who are going through something hard at this moment. What would you say to them?
Yeah. You know, hardship, it can look different to different people, right? Your experience might be very, very different from the person next to you, but you're both, more than likely you're experiencing something that's challenging. The best piece of advice that I would offer is that you can almost always break big problems down into very small bite-sized pieces. And instead of letting yourself or potentially just finding yourself overwhelmed with trying to overcome that big challenge, try and practice that compartmentalization of problems. Okay, here's this one bucket of issues that I need to deal with. Let me break that bucket down into something that I can take, one small piece of at a time. um, like we talked about, right? It does start with the belief that you can work through those things and ultimately get past that bigger challenge. But again, if you break things down into really small pieces and you start tackling those little things one by one by one, over time, you will realize that you can get through whatever that hard thing is. And then the next time you face a hard thing, it won't be as difficult because you'll have that stronger sense of belief. You'll have that built up ability to or that built up grit just from doing that in the past, that you'll be able to get through it. And frankly, like when you're going through that process, work hard and just be nice to people. That's a shout out to Jimmy DeSico at Super Coffee. He taught me that one, and I just really enjoy that. I think it's really relevant, and we could use more of that in today's world.
I agree. We can use more of both of those things in today's world. And, the cool part is we get to leave this conversation, and so do the people listening, with a number of opportunities today, tomorrow, the rest of this week, month, year, our lifetime to continue to work hard and be nice to people, continue to build the belief and the grit. And I really feel inspired through this conversation, Dan. And I'm sure the people listening do as well. And if anyone wanted to reach out to you or learn more about what you're doing with Elevation Everest, where are the best places for people to do those things?
For sure. So the Elevation Everest Instagram account is probably the best way to start. That's just at Elevation Everest. Um, if you had like specific questions for me, I'm happy to share my email. It's just dan@elevationeverest.com. And then if it's cool with you, Joe, I mean, I'd like to offer your community, frankly, a discount code. So if they wanted to come out and see what this race is all about, that they could do that. So if they use Project Endure, that specific code at checkout, we'll go ahead and throw them 20% off their ticket. So come check us
Ama-
out.
Amazing. I don't know if you know this about me, but this past September, I did a 24-hour event here in Philadelphia, climbing up and down the Rocky Steps, the famous Rocky Steps. And I forget off the top of my head what the exact elevation was, but it was actually, maybe I'm going to put you on the spot. What's the elevation of Mount Everest again?
It's 29,032 feet.
Okay, so it was over half of that. And I had a blast. I loved the experience of climbing.
Yeah.
And so pending when the stair climb is this year and what life looks like, I'll have to think about that for myself. And I really appreciate you extending that offer to the community and the listeners. And I'm excited to see what you do, Dan, and very grateful for the beginning of this friendship.
Likewise, Joe. Think the world of you, man, and thanks for having me on. And if we have an opportunity to meet up in September, that would be absolutely awesome.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.